Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Happy Friday, everyone, wherever in the world you are connecting from today. If it's still Friday, by the way, because if you are on the other side of the world for us here in the United States, then it's Saturday for you. So happy Saturday for you as well. Thank you so much, everyone, for being part of this Hacking HR live chat series that we started at the beginning of this year, bringing brilliant, talented guests to discuss about the research, the books they have written about, their insights, their recommendations for all of us in this community. It's been really exciting to bring all of these guests together, to bring them to the show and have them, share their insights and their ideas with us. So super exciting, excited about that. If you have missed any of the previous live chat series that we've had here in Hacking HR, you can go to our website, hackinghr.io, and you click on live chats, and all of them are available in there. So you can check them all out, or the ones that, of course, are of the most interest for you. But please do that because there's a lot of great content in there. It's really amazing. And this month, we're recording this in May, or we're doing this live in May, and today's May the 12th. This month is Mental Health Awareness Month. So we are dedicating pretty much everything that we do through our entire social media outlets. We are dedicating everything we do to mental health. So most of our Hacking HR live chat conversations are focused on mental health, of course, from many different perspectives, but on mental health and well-being. The Hacking HR May series, which is running right now, and that's a different thing. It's panel conversations. We've had already like 6 or 7, and there are about 9 more coming up in the next couple of weeks. All of the sessions of that May series are dedicated to mental health, as also the content that we are sharing on our social media channels. All of it, most of it actually, dedicated to mental health this month. We do this the entire year, by the way, but in May, we put so much more effort into sharing resources with you. For everybody who's connected online right now, please let us know where in the world you are connecting from today. It would be awesome to know where everybody is. And if you have any question, any comment, any insight, anything that you want to share with me, with my guest today, with the community, please post it in the chat. It would be awesome to read what you are thinking about, and try to bring any questions that you may have to the attention of my guests. So super excited about talking today with Ryan about the book he wrote, Connectable: How Leaders Can Move Teams from Isolated to All In. Talking about isolation, by the way, I'm going to be asking this to Ryan in a second, but a couple of weeks ago, the Surgeon General of the United States released the framework to work for reducing or solving what he called the epidemic of isolation in the United States, which, by the way, is true for a lot of countries around the world as well. And one of the things he said in his introduction to the framework was that feeling isolated and all the negative consequences of feeling isolated is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and all the physical effects, the physical symptoms that has on people. That was incredibly shocking. So I'm hoping that we can talk about that with Ryan as well, and now bring him to the stage. Good morning, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for being here. Super excited to have you with me today. And I would love for you to please introduce yourself to our community. If you can tell us who you are, more of who you are, the work you've done, and why you wrote this book, Connectable.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for your time and attention. Enrique, thanks for taking the time to have this important conversation. And yeah, my name is Ryan Jenkins. I've been a keynote speaker and consultant for about 12 years now, and mostly in my space is kind of the future of work. And so I first attacked that conversation by helping clients and organizations around the world kind of understand the evolving differences across generations. And I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and I was writing my second book, which was all about Generation Z. And when I was writing that book, I found out that 79% of Gen Z say they experience loneliness or isolation at least monthly.
Wow.
So it was the first time we've ever seen an emerging generation having more isolation and loneliness than our elderly population. And so I found that very alarming. And wouldn't you believe it? It was actually, this was all pre-pandemic. So they were experiencing this levels of isolation and loneliness. And I thought, gosh, if this is going to be the generation that's going to be the fastest growing in the workforce over the next decade, we've got to figure out ways in which to help them connect. And then, so that's what led me to go write this book, Connectable. And we eventually did research around the world of workers and how they're approaching isolation and how do they think about connection. And yeah, and the book came out last year. It hit number 7 on the Wall Street Journal bestseller, and it was just rated the number 3 leadership book of all of 2022 by the thousands of readers. So we're thrilled by how much folks are loving it, and yeah, happy to unpack the research and more insights with you today. But that gives you a little bit of the genesis story of the book.
Yeah, well, that is amazing, and I'm guessing that all the great reviews and the ranking of the book is a testament of how people are seeking for a way out of this, right? A way out of isolation, how to solve this epidemic. Now that it's a pandemic, actually, because it's happening globally as well, and particularly with the younger generations, which, by the way, creates this question in my mind, right? We call these newer generations, perhaps the younger millennials. I'm an old millennial or an older millennial, but the younger millennials, the Gen Z generation, we call them digital natives, right? We say, hey, you have technology right in your hands, you know how to use it, and this technology allows you to connect with everybody in nanoseconds, right? And yet you feel isolated, you feel lonely, you feel disconnected. Isn't that a kind of like a weird paradox going on in there, Ryan?
Yeah, it's the most connected generation of all time, and yet they're the most disconnected at the same time. So you're right, it is a little bit jarring, but I'll give you a little bit of some insight into maybe what's happening here. And I'm convinced everyone around on the planet, we're wildly underestimating how much we need connection, but we don't quite understand what connection is. Like, we understand that relationships matter, but what connection and communication are 2 completely different things. And the emerging generation, while we think they're connected, they're actually just communicating. Technology enables communication, not necessarily connection. So let me break it down. So communication is the exchanging of information, and that's processed in the front part of our brain. But connection is this sense of feeling seen and heard, and that's processed in the back part of our brains. And your listeners that are tuning in, you've experienced this. If you've texted with a loved one, if you text them, "I love you," that's just communication. It doesn't become connection until they can hear the tone in your voice, or they can feel your embrace when you express that sentiment. So that's the difference, big difference. So I like to sum it up by saying communication is dealt, but connection is felt. And so we're using all this wonderful technology, and we should still continue to use it, but let's not make the mistake and think that we're connected with our fellow human beings, because that's just not the case. We're communicating. If we want to take it to connection, which is what we want, ultimately, it's our most significant need as humanity, is connection and belonging. We have to be that much more intentional about moving from just communication to connection. So that's the big thing. And I think that's what's happening with the emerging generation, is they feel like they're connected, and they're social snacking just enough through their digital devices that they're keeping their loneliness levels just in a manageable level. And what they need to do instead is have a nourishing meal with someone in person, or have a really enriching conversation to move from communication to connection.
Oh, that's so powerful. Is isolation getting worse? When you look over time, and I don't know if you've done how far in time you've looked into this, but let's say particularly over the past maybe 20 years, right, since the advent of social media, has isolation been getting worse over the past 20 years?
It has. Loneliness has been growing steadily for decades and decades. And then, of course, the pandemic put a big spotlight on it, accelerated it. But there's a positive angle to this, Enrique, and that is whatever increases can also decrease. And I'm so glad, like, as you mentioned, the U.S. Surgeon General is now putting a big spotlight on this being an issue. And we're just starting to learn more and more about how detrimental isolation and loneliness is. So first step here is awareness, and to start to understand just how terrible this can be, not only for our physical health, but our mental health and the performance of our teams and organizations. So it has been growing. And I think a big contributor to the growth of isolation, I'll give you a quick story and then I'll tell you kind of what it means. But I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I've got three kids under 7. And my youngest, when he turned 1, we threw a big birthday party. And we were going to invite a bunch of friends over. And we invited our college-age friend Cassidy over to help my wife and I prepare the dishes before the family and friends came over. And my wife handed Cassidy a can of olives, and she said, "Hey, could you open this up and put that on that dish?" She said, "Sure thing." My wife and I turned and we began preparing some other dishes. And a few moments went by and we realized, hey, nothing's happening with Cassidy's dish, and she hasn't done anything with those olives. And so we investigated a little bit further, and it turns out she was on her phone. And we thought, oh no, she's gotten distracted. Like, we need to nudge her into some action. And then we investigated a little bit further, and turns out she wasn't distracted. She was being like most Gen Zers are, and she was being extraordinarily resourceful because she was actually on her phone watching a YouTube video on how to use a manual can opener.
Wow.
She'd never used one of those before. Now it's a fascinating and funny story, but the point here is that you and I, all of us, are less dependent on each other than we ever have been before. So just in that moment, Cassidy could have turned to another human that was right feet from her and got some help. But instead, she turned to the largest how-to library ever assembled, which is YouTube. And so listeners and viewers, you can relate. You're less likely to go knock on a neighbor's door if something breaks in your home, or call a parent or a sibling. You're going to turn to the web. So subtly, this technology, again, while it's all great and we should continue to keep using it, but we need to be mindful that it's subtly pulling us apart, and we're becoming more isolated and disconnected from each other. And so that's one of many reasons why we're more isolated than ever before.
You know what? I got to tell you, man, I had never thought about that, a story like that with an insight like that, right? And it is so true. Right now we have all this movement, which I think, it has a lot of positive things, of course, the do-it-yourself kind of thing, right? That has trickled out to pretty much everything we do. And in the past, not, maybe just 50 years ago, we would have to knock on that door to ask somebody else, how do I do this thing? Or can you help me out? And now we don't, we just go to technology. And I wonder I wonder how workplaces can create the conditions for people to say, all right, I want to be resourceful. I want to go to my smartphone and I'm going to look on YouTube how to use the olives in this dish, or how to use the manual can opener. But at the same time, how to kind of like foster the safety or the trust or the possibility from somebody to just knock on somebody else's door and say, hey, I don't know how to do this and I need your help. So how can workplaces do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because we don't want to not be using these tools because they help us to be more efficient. But I think the goal here is to use this technology to be more efficient. And with that time that we've saved, make sure that we're prioritizing connection. Because as humans, we go to the path of least resistance. And so often we're choosing convenience over connection, right? It's way easier to just order contactless food delivery right to my house, and I don't have to actually show up and communicate with another human. So we have to make these subtle changes and subtle decisions to intentionally choose connection. So we like to say, couple high tech with high touch. A good example was I was recently speaking at a healthcare conference, and I was talking with a gentleman that was talking about telemedicine and how you can put AI in your ear, and the AI can actually diagnose a patient's cough with greater accuracy than the doctor. And so it's incredible. And it's, I asked him afterwards, I said, hey, if this is, the future, then what happens to the role of a doctor when this AI is going to just be that powerful? And I thought his response was brilliant. I think it parallels to what we can all do at work. And that is, the doctor will revert back to what they were, 30, 40, 50 years ago. They'll use the technology to deliver better care, but it'll save time to where they can actually show up for the patient and deliver more
Mhm.
empathy and compassion, and
Yeah.
only deliver on the things that us as humans can deliver for each other. And so I
Yeah.
think there's a balance there. We need to be focused on both, and we need to intentionally choose connection, because it's not static. You're either
Yeah.
drawing closer to your teammates or you're drawing away. And so
Yeah.
I also like to think of, connection and your well-being is kind of like the battery of your phone, right? Like, we don't just connect once and then our phone is charged forever. We have to consistently connect our phone in order to stay charged. And that's the same thing with our connections. We have to consistently find opportunities to connect with each other. Otherwise, our mental health deteriorates, our physical health will deteriorate, and ultimately the social fabric will deteriorate as well.
Yeah, no, that's very important. And I was thinking about this grocery chain, and I can't remember in what country it is. I think it was in Sweden or Finland, where they have a strong, drive toward social connection and community and the collectivism, right? And there was this store, and they implemented self checkouts, right, where you just scan your own things and then you pay, and you basically don't talk to anybody. And then this is in a community with a lot of elder people, and then they asked the customers if they were happy with these new solutions, and they said no, because yes, it is faster, but I loved talking to the cashier when I went to the grocery store, because I don't have anybody else to talk to, like, about this chit chat kind of thing, right? And that, it's a small thing, right? But that kind of connection that they found in talking to those cashiers for a couple of minutes was replaced by technology. And I'm not a Luddite, by the way, so I love technology, but I fear that space that technology is freeing up in us, I wish it was used for more, for showing up for more connection and empathy and kindness. But I fear that it's going to be replaced by trying to be more efficient about efficiency, trying to do something more than is not what we were told we were going to be doing with that time in the first place. What do you think about that?
No, it's absolutely true. I mean, in the book, we talk a lot about ATMs, and ATM. The invention of the ATM was really one of the first examples of a technology that scaled, and it disrupted our connections, because usually, before ATMs on paydays, people would go into the bank and they'd be waving around their check. At least this is in my head, because I'm a millennial like you, Enrique, and I've never actually been inside of a bank, but I heard it was like a party before ATMs, and people would connect. And then
Yeah.
the ATM shows up, and then all disappeared. It became more efficient, but we lost that opportunity to connect with the bank tellers or their other
Yeah.
customers. And there's actually a really fascinating story about the inventor of the ATM. His name's Donald Wetzel, and he created the ATM. And just to picture this, he spent months and months and months creating this thing. He emerges from his innovation cave, and he goes to his wife, Eleanor, and he says, "Hey, Eleanor, I finally finished the ATM. Come check it out." And she said, "No, thanks." She was like, "No, I'm good." And he was like, "What? I've spent, months and months and months on this thing, and this thing is going to change everything. And come check it out." And she said, "No." She said, "The reason why is because the ATM will never smile back at me." And
Wow.
to this day, they're still married, if you can believe it, and they live in Texas. And Eleanor has never used an ATM. And it's a really good reminder of, hey, again, we can convenience ourselves to death, and we can make life really easy and cut out the imperfect humans. But that's not a life worth living, and that's removes the most central thing to you and I's health and well-being. It's
Yeah.
our social connections. And
Yeah.
so we've got to be really careful, and we've got to be intentional about choosing connection, because if not, we'll default to convenience, and
Yeah.
we'll lose a lot in the
Yeah.
process.
And I think that what's happening is that, or one of the things that is happening is that we're choosing convenience simply because it's a time factor, right? I mean, we do something faster, therefore we save money in doing this one thing in that way. But what I feel we are failing to see is the long-term impact of that convenience, right? And think about the workplace. We're doing all these things through technology, and we're breaking the fiber of social connection and belonging at work. And we may not see, although I do think we have the data now to see it, but we may fail to see today how that is negatively impacting people's mental health, people's well-being, and the effects of this in the long term, just because we're seeking that efficiency today. And I don't know how to help some of these companies or help them see that while they are doing something that saves them money or makes them more money within the next 12 months, in the next 36 months, maybe they have a crisis of people, tuning out of work just because they are like, I'm not finding, purpose here. I'm not finding passion. Nobody helps me. I don't have a friend at work. And how do we approach then that conversation? Because for a lot of these businesses, they have to make the money. But at the same time, I think that if you present the case in the proper way, maybe, there's a component of, all right, let's make sure that we also keep that fabric stronger or strengthen it. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give the audience some data points, because you're right. There is a business case to be made here, and it's a strong one. According to our research that we did, so again, we interviewed over 2,000 global workers, and we found that 72% of the global workforce says they experience disconnection or loneliness at least monthly. Wow. And 69% of employees say that they're not satisfied with the opportunities for connection at work. And then 3 in 5 employees say that their leaders aren't doing a good job discussing or promoting connections. So that tells the full story there, really, is that we're more disconnected than ever before. We're looking towards the workplace to find more of this connection. And that's makes sense to me, because that's where we spend most of our waking hours, is at work. So of course, we're going to think about how do we connect at work. And then thirdly, they're turning to leaders and organizations, and they're finding that they're just ill-equipped. So that's why we're so compelled by the work that we're doing, because we're giving folks tools to actually connect individuals and to create more of that belonging at work. And if folks are, listening to this, or thinking, gosh, well, my team hasn't said anything about feeling isolated or disconnected, it's because they won't tell you. 90% of employees said that if they're experiencing isolation or loneliness, they won't tell their supervisor. Wow. So it's all underground, and it's starting to swell, and we've got to get under it and address it. So that's kind of gives you the state and what's at stake here. If we don't actually cultivate more connection at work, our workforce is 7 times more likely to be disengaged, 5 times more likely to actually miss work. They're 3 times less likely to perform well, and then they're 3 times more likely to actually quit. So recruitment, engagement, performance, all these things improve when we focus on connection. And I'll take a couple steps back here, because I think it's important to note too, that just give folks an understanding of the science of connection. It's really pretty basic. I mean, when our ancestors who roamed the plains, there was always strength in numbers, right? They could pull each other's resources. We could watch each other's backs. We could leverage each other's strengths. And then when someone got disconnected from that tribe, their survival rate plummeted, right? Because they were on their own. And so when you're disconnected, when you feel isolated from the team or tribe, your body goes into a stress state. You're in a fight or flight state. And was helpful evolutionary, right? Because if you're alone in the woods, you want to be hyper vigilant, because when you hear a twig snap, you got to be ready to go into action to save your life. Our body functions the same way now. If we're feeling that sense of disconnection, of course we're going to quiet quit. Of course we're going to leave the organization, because we don't have that sense of connection. So I'm convinced, hopefully you can hear my voice, and I'm very passionate about this, that connection is the key. If we can get this right, everything else flows from it. So we got to get this right. The health of our individuals, our families, our communities, our teams, it depends on it. So we got to get it right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I am extremely passionate about that too, because I have been writing about this for pretty much since the beginning of the pandemic, but how belonging should be the cultural priority for any organization. And because we know that from belonging, which pretty much is those meaningful and strong connections and relationships at work, a lot of things stem out from there, right? I mean, the high performance, productivity, people showing up for work, people getting less sick, having their mental health improved and their overall well-being improved. All of it is connected to them finding those connections at work. And actually, the studies of happiness, which I'm sure you look at, when you look at the top 2 or 3 things that make people happy, one of them is social connections, human connections. And we are, for many reasons, we're removing that from the equation, and that is so dangerous. And in fact, I don't know, Ryan, if you looked at the very first pieces of research that came out at the beginning of the pandemic of how people were feeling about work and life, blah, blah, blah. A lot of them said, well, I love that I can work from home because I'm saving money, I'm saving time, I'm spending more time with family. Yes, there are circumstances that are awful, but these positive things are happening for me. However, the one thing they said that they wish it was different was finding that they belonged to work. They didn't feel that they were connecting properly with their teammates as they were working remotely. So any thoughts on how to make connections, how to make social community and communities of support at work when people are on a remote kind of like approach to work?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, I'll back up by saying this too, because it's important to note that loneliness is not the absence of people, it's the absence of connection, right? So you and I, we could be in a crowded office space surrounded by people, but we could still feel isolated and alone if we don't have connections with those individuals, right? So conversely, if you're working remotely, but you have a strong connection to your work and your leaders and the culture of the company, then you might not feel the same level of isolation as that person did in the crowded office space. So that's important to note. So certainly connection can occur in the virtual world. It takes more effort, it takes more intentionality, but certainly don't discount that as well. But when we got into the space, we saw a big opportunity to help folks connect. And it's challenging, right? Because all the reasons we talked about, right? There's fear of rejection, and there's this, people are inefficient, and it's where do you have the time, and it takes too long to invest in relationships, and et cetera, et cetera. And so our goal was threefold. We took a 3-step approach to tackling connection. So the first approach was awareness. So that's why we wrote the book and did the research, and to make people aware that, hey, this is a problem. And we gave some solutions and some ideas on what to do in the book. Step 2 was, hey, let's help organizations quantify how connected their teams are. So we created the world's first team connection assessment. So it's empirically validated to actually quantify how strongly connected teams are. And then the third step that answers your question is, what do we do? We developed a product called Rivet. So it's like Rivet, like the pin that connects two things to make them stronger. It's a platform, a tech platform that actually connects colleagues that are scientifically proven to build a strong relationship. And we know from decades and decades and decades of the important work from Gallup, according to their Q12 employee engagement survey, that it just takes one friend, one strong connection at work, and you're that much more engaged and willing to perform and less likely to quit. So that's what we're focused on is folks take an 8-minute assessment, they figure out their work persona, and then they get matched to someone inside their company that they're scientifically proven to develop a strong relationship with. And over 90% of the folks that we match say that they would connect again with the folks that we're connecting inside the organization. So a lot of misnomers is it doesn't take a lot of time. In fact, research shows 40 seconds is as long as it takes to cultivate a genuine connection with another person. Wow. And then again, it's just one friend, and it can go a long way. And so back to your question of what we can do, there's some really specific, tangible things. If folks are interested in learning more, you can go to workrivet.com for more information on that service that we have.
No, that is awesome. And let me ask you this: when you were doing the research, interviewing thousands of people, and then using the tech tool Rivet to connect people, of all the things that you found out, of all the things that you wrote down as insights and discoveries and whatnot, is there anything that stood out to you like, whoa, either something that you didn't expect or something that was significantly more consequential in terms of your research and your findings than anything else?
Yeah, how little time it takes to cultivate a connection, that's a big one.
Yeah.
That stood out to me. Just 40 seconds is pretty extraordinary, right?
It is, yeah.
And what do they say? They say that authors write the books that they themselves need to read. That's true of me. I'm actually an introvert, and so I wrote a book about connecting with others. Go figure. But I was always, my brain was misleading me when it came to connections in the area of I wasn't interested in expanding my connections. Like I wanted to keep my social circle tight, and I wanted to go deep with my relationships, not wide. And what that led me to do is if I would share an elevator with a stranger, I would just choose not to connect with that individual, because I knew, hey, I'm never going to see this person again. Why take the time? I'm going to bury my head in my phone. And I know now, according to the research, and back to your question, what stood out, the research is clear that connection is vital to our health and well-being. And so I was leaving well-being on the table for myself and that stranger. And so now I choose to connect. And the simple phrase I always ask folks is, how's your day going?
Yeah.
Just that, it's that easy. It's not too intrusive, but it breaks the social script. So too often we get into these social scripts, and at least here in the US, we always say, how you doing? Well, we're not actually interested in knowing how are you doing. It's just a way of saying hi.
Yeah.
So we have to break these scripts to get folks out of their out of their heads or out of their devices to actually, say, hey, I'm right here, and I'm actually curious. Are you doing okay today?
Yeah.
And again, it just takes 40 seconds. We leave the elevator, my well-being's boosted, and so is theirs. And so that stood out to me, is just how little it takes to actually cultivate connection. And my brain was misleading me and tripping me up. And I now choose to connect wherever I can.
Oh, I love that. By the way, I was born in outside of the U.S., and in my birth country, we just say, hi, hello, and we combine that with something else, right? And when I came here, people were asking, how do you do? How are you doing? How's it going? And I'm like, why are people asking this stuff, right? I mean, what do they want to know about whatever, right? Just because I think it was internally, I thought it was a polite way to say, I don't want to just say hello or hi. I want to say something that is a little notch up from hello and hi, but not too much as to be either too intrusive or to have to stay in this conversation for minutes when I have to rush something else. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because there's a cultural element here in how people connect to, right? And do you have any insights on those cultural differences in the way people connect with each other, around the world?
Yeah. I mean, the research we did, I know in the chat when you told folks to say where folks were coming from, I mean, people are all over the world. So that's fantastic. What an incredible reach. And yeah, our research was global, and we looked at every, overall the entire country. And unfortunately, the news is loneliness is growing all over the world. And yeah, we all have these cultural norms that we kind of sink into. But at the end of the day, you and I have this same red blood pumping through our veins, and we crave connection. And I keep saying it's the most significant need. And that's not, I'm not flippant in saying that, because it's actually, according to Harvard research, that's done the largest study of an adult development that's ever been conducted. It's still going on today. They've studied over 2,000 people for over 80 years.
Yeah.
And their whole point of this research is to figure out the definitive answer to a long and healthy life. And it wasn't diet or wealth or economic status or DNA. What they found was quality connections with others. Was what is the definitive answer to a long and healthy life. So it's our most significant need. It's not our most urgent need, because we got to figure out all these other needs. No matter where you are in the world, we have more urgent needs, but we've got to start to embrace and really understand that connection with others is it. That's the thing we've really got to be focused on.
Oh, I love that. And by the way, I learned about that research for the first time when I was reading, which I am still reading, The Body Keeps the Score, which is a very heavy book, and it's taking me so long to read. But he talks about it, and he says, the author, one of the things he says is how, for example, people who go through horrible experiences in life, say war or the Holocaust or natural disasters, they are better prepared to be resilient, to emerge. I don't want to say stronger, but to find that light at the end of the tunnel faster than others when they had those social networks of support around them, right? People who help them. And I recently was wrote a book, an article about kindness. And one thing that, of course, I know the positive effects of kindness in the body, but one thing that I didn't know about kindness was that there's research that shows that when doctors have a kind relationship and connection with people recovering from surgery, those people recover faster than the ones that are not getting that from the doctors. Things as, how is your day going? How are you feeling? What can I do for you? So those kinds of questions that foster that connection. And that to me is so beautiful and powerful.
Yeah, you're right. And to kind of bring it back to connection, when you demonstrate pro-social behavior, so that's things like empathy, compassion, kindness, things like you're talking about. When we demonstrate pro-social behaviors to someone else, that other person is 278% more likely to go then extend pro-social behaviors to somebody else,
Oh,
because it makes us feel good, right? When it makes us
yeah.
feel good, and we want to give that to somebody else, and so there's a massive ripple effect here if we can really again focus on connection and think about how we can demonstrate more pro-social behaviors.
Oh, I love that. Now, Ryan, let me ask you this. The role of trust in building connections, meaningful connections at work and in life. What is the role of trust?
Yeah, trust plays a really important role, and I think a lot of it, trust stems from saying something and then actually following through on it, right? and
Mm,
and being someone that you can be dependable, right? This idea of being dependable on somebody else is really, really important. And so we always encourage folks to think about how can you be more dependable, because it is a very core tenet of humanity as well.
yeah.
Because think about back to our ancestors who roamed the plains, you had to be contributing to the group. You had to be a dependable person. You had to be a trustworthy person, because if you weren't, there wasn't a lot of opportunities to have freeloaders and part of the group. So you would be excluded from the tribe if you weren't, contributing and being trustworthy. So it's an important element that we be trustworthy individuals if we want to cultivate that connection with others. There's a lot of other great books and experts on trust, that I would turn, if folks are interested in trust, turning your attention to those resources. But certainly, as when it comes to connection, it is an important element as well.
Yeah. Now, what's the, and I know we're getting to the end of our chat and I want to be mindful of the time, but got just a couple of last questions for you. One is the difference between being alone or liking to be alone and feeling either isolated or lonely. And I ask you this question. I don't know if you read this book. It came out, I think, a couple of months ago. I think it's fascinating. It's called At the Center of All Beauty by Fenton Johnson. It's about solitude. And he talks about what he calls solitaries, from Mark Twain to, Eudora Welty and, painters, Cezanne. So he says, how these people had connections in their lives and were bubbly and happy, but they found that energy in being alone. So any insights on the difference between liking to be alone, finding that creative maximum output when you're alone versus isolation, loneliness?
Yeah, I love this question, and you're right. There's a big difference between uh, lonely and alone. Those are two
Yeah.
different things, right? One is you're not surrounded by other people, so you're alone. But lonely is this emotional state that you're in.
Mm,
So very different. And believe it or not, aloneness can be insurance against loneliness. So
mm,
let's go back to the definition I shared earlier. Loneliness is not the absence of people; it's the absence of connection. And so connection, one of the primary connections we got to focus on is connection with oneself.
mm.
And so if you can be in a state where you're alone or in solitude, that's a great opportunity to find connection with oneself. And how I would define solitude, it's the being free of the input of other minds.
Yeah.
So you could still experience solitude in a busy coffee shop as long as your thinking is self-directed, and meditation or prayer or gratitude journal. These are all different forms of solitude, and those are really important and helpful. And so again, yeah, aloneness can be insurance against loneliness. And so I'm sure all the introverts that are watching, you
They
can
feel validated.
rejoice. Yeah.
They feel vindicated, validated by you right now, which is, by the way, what this book, At the Center of All Beauty, does. And he says it. Fenton Johnson says it. I am uh, providing validation and confirmation that if you like to be alone, there's nothing wrong with you, right? It is okay. And these are all the people that have been okay in their lives, very productive and creative people, and they were alone. They were alone. Doesn't mean that they were isolated from the world, living in a cabin on the top of the mountain by themselves, right? They like parties and they like people. Maybe they were not that much introverted, but they liked this aloneness that you're talking about, Ryan. Now, this is my last question for you. I know step number one for people here to fight this epidemic of loneliness is go and check out Connectable. So go and purchase Connectable by Ryan Jenkins, and go to Amazon or whatever platform you use to buy your books. But the second step, Ryan, when it comes to what every individual, every person without authority or power at work, what they can do to fight the epidemic of loneliness and isolation, in their organizations, in their communities. What are a couple of actions that they individually can do to make things better?
Yeah, one of the big, and thanks again for the shout out. I hope folks grab a copy, and I think you'll love this book, and reach out to me. You can find our work at connectionmadeeasy.com. And then if you're interested in that other tool, it's workrivet.com. But I totally spaced on the question. It was, what can people do? Yeah. So
a couple of things that individuals without that leadership, it's not like they're not the CEO mandating you now have to connect with everybody else. They are just individual, ordinary people trying to fight this epidemic of isolation and loneliness.
The number one thing that disrupts our connections with others is busyness. Busyness. Time constraints severely limit our willingness to connect with others. So as an individual, you've got to look at your calendar and you've got to figure out where is their margin. So that could be showing up early to your next meeting so that you can have some time to actually have a meaningful connection with a barista or a fellow colleague. So showing up early, creating those moments where there's extra time to connect, or that might be after a meeting, hanging around longer and trying to converse and connecting with others. So busyness is a big deal. And if you've got back to meetings and other things on your calendar, be very careful, because that busyness, we just get in a rut and we look at people as tasks rather than as other humans that we can connect to. And one of the ways that we combat busyness, is a really simple thing that we do with the Rivet team is, we're a connection company. So we're constantly trying to figure out how does our team connect. And we do, in order to fight busyness, at the top of every weekly meeting that we have with the whole team, we do something that's called Connect 5. So we spend 5 minutes at the top of each meeting. We always have enough things to discuss that we could go over time, but we know that connection is so important. So we spend 5 minutes at the top where someone shares a picture that's non-work related. So the other day, someone shared a picture of their marathon training, and we thought, oh my gosh, we had no idea you ran these marathons. So not only now do we know you're a competent social media manager, but my goodness, you're also an extraordinary athlete. And so that gives another data point for us to build connections with one another, and that person then feels seen and heard as well. So there's very simple things that we can do to cultivate more connection. And so hopefully those are some helpful tips.
That's beautiful, man. I said that the last question was the last question, but this is going to be the last question, and it's even simpler than the previous ones. But any couple of, and please forgive me for oversimplifying or going to the to the cheap way out. But I just want to ask you this: couple of easy questions to open up conversations. You said one, right? How's your day going? Right. And, you enter into the elevator and you go to the meeting. How's your day going? That's different than how's it going? How you doing? Or, how are you? But couple of questions that people can ask to open up those questions. Imagine somebody here being like, oh man, I want to do some of this. I just don't know what to say. I just don't know how to do it. I have never asked Ryan, these kinds of things before. So yeah, a couple of questions that people can ask to start creating those meaningful connections.
Yeah, so feel free to use the one that I've been using. How's your day going? Or how's your morning going? And then be ready for the response and be eager for that response. That body language and your presence goes a long way. Another really simple one is tell me more. Someone shares something and simply just say, tell me more. Or if you repeat the last 3 words that someone said in a sentence, like, hey, I took my dog through a walk through the Atlanta park. And if you say the Atlanta park, then that spurs that other individual to expand more about it, right? To tell you more.
I love that.
That's the conversation. It's a negotiation tactic. I heard from the one of the former FBI negotiators. So really fascinating. But here's the bigger picture I think that folks should glob onto here. And I'm sure many folks have been on an airplane where they're out on the tarmac and the plane gets delayed. And then when that happens, it gets really chatty inside of that airplane. Why? Because there's a shared reality. When we have shared realities, it tends to break the ice and we're able to connect easier. That's like if you were to take a dog to a park, that dog can serve as a shared reality and someone can comment on that and it can break the ice. Similarly, if you're at an art museum by yourself and you're looking at a piece of art, a stranger comes up next to you, they're also consuming that piece of art. That piece of art is a shared reality. And you can actually then connect on that. You can then say, hey, that's a really interesting shade of blue. And you can start conversing that way. So being mindful of these realities that you're sharing with others. And that's why technology can get in the way. Because again, if I'm at that art museum and I'm on my phone and that stranger comes up next to me, they don't know what I'm consuming on my device. Thus, there's no shared reality, right? So that's where these devices can get in the way. So back to your question on what are some of these things we can ask, just be mindful of the things that you're sharing with other people and comment on those things. Because again, that shared reality really helps to knit humanity together.
Oh, I love that. And I'm glad we're having this conversation on a Friday, by the way, because I have a lot to reflect about this weekend on even the kind of questions that I ask, right? I didn't think about the last, kind of like repeating the last 3 things that somebody else said to me. And when you said it, I was thinking about it. I'm like, yeah, that actually works. It opens up for you to say like, oh yeah, this park is awesome. I bring my dog here all the time, and boom, you are in the middle of a wonderful conversation, maybe meeting your next coworker, your next partner, whatever it is. So who knows, right? Or just a simple conversation that made you happier that day or more joyful. So Ryan, thank you so much for being here, sharing all of these insights with me, with our Hacking HR community. Everybody connected online right now, watching live, thank you so much for being here. I hope you all have a fantastic Friday. And if you have missed any of the previous live sessions that we've had, please go to our website. You will find this one in there with Ryan's information, including the websites that he mentioned during our chat. We will post that on our website as well. So make sure that you check that out. And I guess I will see you all probably next week or some other week with the many things that we have prepared for you, particularly this month around mental health. So Ryan, thank you so much for spending this time with me and our community. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.